Are you ready to thrive? As a trauma therapist, author, yoga instructor, and healed human, I personally and professionally know what it means to live stuck in survival mode. I've learned a few things in my healing journey and my career that can help you transform into your best self. Join me, Rebecca Case, as I use neuroscience, psychology, spirituality, and personal experience to help you find the tools and techniques to thrive. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Thrive the Podcast. I'm Rebecca Case, your host, and on today's episode, we're going to be getting into mindset. I've spoken on here before about the Thrive 5. The Thrive 5 is a framework that I use to build positive habits, positive lifestyle habits that collectively allow me to thrive, give my nervous system the resources it needs to be its best. The Thrive 5 includes the domains of physical wellness, emotional wellness, mindset, spiritual habits and techniques, and the state of your relationships. So today we're specifically focusing on that domain of mindset. And let me tell you why this is so important. Your brain is so very powerful. The human brain is what has allowed us to shoot people into space and put people on the moon. It allowed us to solve complex problems. It's allowed you to reach and achieve some of your goals in life, to navigate some of the hard times you have in life, to figure things out, to form memories, to hold conversations, to learn, to do math, to solve puzzles. Your brain is incredibly powerful. Now, the brain and the mind are not one and the same. Your mind is made possible because you have a brain. If you didn't have a brain, you wouldn't have a mind and wouldn't be listening to this podcast or trying new things or learning new things or challenging your perspective. Your mind is really made up of kind of the collection of thoughts and beliefs, and whether that's conscious or unconscious processes that happen just naturally without you really having to put any intention into it. Your mind is designed to think, to problem solve, to predict, to try and interpret things, to judge things, and it's really focused on your survival. Our nervous system is hardwired to keep us alive, and so it's always focusing on things that could be threatening or things that could be dangerous or potentially stressful. And your mind just operates without your conscious intentional thought. You don't wake up in the morning and say, let me turn on my brain now. Let me turn on my mind. No, in fact, sometimes, your mind is what wakes you up because it's trying to solve a problem, and it kind of poked you and said, hey, wake up, think about this terrible thing. Like the other night, I woke up at 3:00 in the morning thinking about fires and how I would get off my island if there was a fire in my area. And my brain just decided that 3:00 in the morning, or my mind rather, decided that 3:00 in the morning was the time to do that disaster planning. Very frustrating. So our mind can run away with us sometimes. I know that you've experienced this. Like, who hasn't? Every human being struggles with how out of control their mind feels sometimes. None of us are born and just have this natural capacity to direct and govern and have complete efficacy and control over the various thoughts that pop up in our head. Not at all. It just kind of happens, doesn't it? Like they just can run amok sometimes. The goal with mindset is not to get in complete control of your mind, because I don't believe that that is ever going to be possible, because your brain, again, is just tasked with your survival, and it's going to wander around and try and disaster plan at 3:00 in the morning when you're trying to get another cycle of REM sleep. That's just what it does. But that doesn't mean that we are completely powerless to our mind, that we can't put up some guardrails around it, try and harness its power for good. Now, if we don't engage in any kind of activities that try and put up guardrails, that try to harness the power of our mind will just run away with us. And it will be a continuous point of suffering and distress. You might have heard of the term of monkey mind, or when our mind just feels like it's running amok with us, when our mind feels like our enemy. These are the qualities and the indicators of a mind that's really needing some training and some discipline, I would say. The monkey mind, we often think of as a very anxious mind, a ruminating mind, a mind that's maybe just very chatty, that's really busy. In yoga, really the intention of yoga is to try and get some power and control over your mind. I don't know if those are really the right terms, but essentially the goal of yoga and yogic practice is to quiet the mind so that you can connect with your true self. Yoga is not about complex physical postures or asanas, as they're called in yoga. It's not just about breathing techniques. It's about a series of practices that ultimately quiet the body, that quiet the mind. And when the mind is quiet, you can connect to your true authentic self. Meditation has similar intentions, as does mindfulness. All of these kind of contemplative embodiment practices are ultimately focused on trying to calm the nervous system, still the mind, because when we can still and quiet the mind, we have access to a deep and profound sense of wisdom and knowing. Mindset is a term that really refers to the collection of attitudes and beliefs that you hold about yourself and others. And those collections of attitudes and beliefs may be conscious and they might be unconscious as well. So those conscious attitudes and beliefs are things that you are probably very well aware of, such as, I believe that I'm a good person, or I don't believe that I'm a good person. But sometimes we're holding on to these unconscious beliefs that are a bit more subtle and we're not so aware of, such as maybe a belief that because I have this disability, this physical or emotional or mental disability, that means that I am incapable of XYZ. And therefore, that belief system has governed your entire life and maybe blocked you from some potential opportunities or even challenging that belief. Sometimes those beliefs are known and aware to you, but a lot of our kind of distorted thought patterns happen below the surface, underneath our conscious awareness. There's a quote by Wayne Dyer that says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And this quote really speaks to the power of mindset, because your mindset influences your perspective on things around you in your life and yourself and other people. And if we have a blocking or limiting mindset, what we are perceiving to be true is likely not true, is a misinterpretation, and something that has been filtered simply based on our perspective. Imagine for a moment that you walked into a big concert hall. It's this big, beautiful concert theater space with, beautiful like decorations on the walls and fancy lighting and lamps and this big stage with this huge red curtain. And you walk in from the back of the first floor. And you're standing kind of in the dark in the back of the first floor. You're looking down on the stage and you would have a specific perspective. Now imagine that you walked into that concert hall for the first time, walking onto stage. You walked onto stage and you have a completely different perspective. In each of those scenarios, you're going to see things and perceive things based on where you are standing in that moment. Another example of this, I think about this all the time. My husband and I are really into birds. Yes, we're birders. That has happened in middle age over here. It's fascinating. Birds are just little dinosaurs. Oh my gosh. They're so cool. If you think that birding is super dorky, I encourage you to get into a deep dive on the internet and learn about birds and dinosaurs and how birds are dinosaurs and just how incredible bird behavior and bird species are, and just be humbled for a moment, find some awe there. Anyway, that's not the purpose of this podcast, but sometimes I think about birds that live in the trees, birds that are in flight a lot and they don't really visit the ground a whole lot, or when they do, it's very brief, very temporary. They're just looking for food. And otherwise, they nest in the trees. They spend most of their life in the trees and flying around. I think about sometimes what it must be like to be a bird that lives at the top of the treetops and what their perspective must be like compared to me, a land animal that doesn't know what it's like to live at the top of a treetop outside of when I was little and just used to climb trees. And even then I wasn't getting super, super high. I wasn't getting all the way up. There's also birds that once they're born, they just fly out to sea and they actually never touch land. And they live out at sea. Think about their perspective versus yours. Or think about marine animals, animals that live in the ocean, or animals that live in lakes and rivers and bodies of water that have never set foot on land. Maybe animals that have never even seen a tree, that haven't ever seen a flower, haven't seen a car or a road or a school, construction and traffic and all those fun nuanced things. Think about how different their perspective would be. And we're all living on this planet. We're all living a life. But based on where we are stationed as we live that life, whether we're in the air, on the land, or in the water, our perspective is going to be completely different. Your mindset is the same. Now, you've maybe heard before this idea that your thoughts have a vibration. Your thoughts have a vibe, an energetic frequency. And this is something that's kind of debated out there in the scientific community. It's, a concept within the realm of metaphysics. And so there is not this large, irrefutable body of evidence that says, yes, your thoughts vibrate at a certain energetic frequency. I mean, this is in the world of metaphysics, the things that literally can't be measured because they are beyond the physical realm. And I'm not going to get into whether or not that is true or not. I think you believe what you want to believe. I will say that everything has a vibrational energy. All matter vibrates. And so thoughts are made possible by your body, which is made up of matter. So yes, I do believe that your thoughts vibrate at a certain frequency, but I digress. There is the belief out there that if you want to call in good things in your life, your thoughts need to match the frequency that you are trying to call in. So if you've read The Secret, or if you've done any work on manifesting, that book and the concept of manifesting is very much based on what's the vibrational energy of your thoughts and your beliefs and your paradigms? And does the vibration of your thinking match the vibration of that which you're trying to call in? So I think that there is truth to that, but that's not where I'm going here. I think that we should look at that concept a little bit differently, especially if we want to get buy into it. Your thoughts are made possible by your nervous system, your brain. And your brain, your nervous system, your body requires energy to function. So your thoughts, perhaps we can say, absolutely have a vibrational energy to them because they are requiring metabolic input from your nervous system to manifest. And the quality of your thoughts also has a metabolic influence on your nervous system and your body. So when we think negative, self-deprecating, kind of harmful thoughts about ourselves and others in the world, when our brains are stuck into a mindset pattern that is about all is terrible, or we're catastrophizing, or we're constantly talking down to ourselves, we're in a pattern of judging other people, we're constantly focusing on the lack, on everything that's wrong and on fire in the world, on how crappy that person was to us and how wrong that other person was to us and why we're not good enough and why we're not worthy. That kind of thinking has a metabolic cost associated with it. And that we can absolutely prove in the scientific literature. So distorted, negative thought patterns tax your nervous system. They require more metabolic energy and have a greater metabolic cost than what we could label as maybe positive thought patterns. So when you're looking for the good, or if you're an optimist, or if you're reframing hard things as like, this is just a challenge, or you see that person who is rude to you as they must be having a hard day. It takes a different toll on your nervous system. So negative, distorted thought patterns are more taxing to your nervous system than positive thought patterns. When we get stuck in those ruts of negative, distorted thought patterns, we're more likely to experience depression, anxiety, obsessive and compulsive behaviors and patterns in our brains. We are more likely to ruminate. We are more likely to have difficulties with sleep. Our relationships are more likely to struggle. And we're also more likely to have a lot of physical health consequences as well. The reason being is that when your mind is constantly focused on the lack and the danger, all that is wrong with you and other people and the world, it puts your neurobiology into a constant state of stress. And when your neurobiology is in a stress response, it is very costly to your metabolism. There's a lot of resources that it requires to maintain an ongoing, persistent, chronic state of stress. This is kind of at the heart of trauma work as well. So yes, this completely connects to how we understand trauma and how we understand our stress responses. So think about, for example, when you're really stressed out, what happens to your sleep? What happens to your digestion? How does your body feel? What happens to your relationships? What happens to your mood? What happens to your level of motivation? Are you more likely to get sick when you're stressed? So, stress has a huge effect and toll on the body in a not good way. Now, I'm not saying that mindset is the same thing as stress. They are not one and the same. But your mindset can put your body under constant duress, can put your nervous system in a state of stress. And when we're stressed, our digestion changes, our immune system can get repressed. So it's harder for us to bounce back from things and fight off disease and illness and infection. Our body is slower to heal. So if you have an injury, if you have a surgery, if there's something, your skin is healing or a bone is healing, it is harder for those things to happen when you're in a chronic state of stress. Your endocrine system doesn't work as it should. It's harder for you to connect with people in those states. It's harder for you to form relations, therefore, and your mood also follows suit. Nobody says when I'm stressed, it's the happiest that I have ever been. Stress and happiness are one and the same. No, they are not, right? We know that. So while mindset is not the same thing as like a negative mindset is not the same thing as stress, we can see that if we are holding a distorted kind of chronic state of negative thinking styles, we are imposing stress responses onto our body. If you are constantly thinking, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I'm a piece of shit, I don't deserve good things, people are not trustworthy, think about what that kind of mental thought is going to do to your nervous system. It is certainly not a mindset that is promoting your neurobiology to be its best and thrive. So we can see that kind of a negative, distorted mindset is going to be very costly to our metabolism, to our bodily resources, putting us into a state of stress that's going to cause a host of chronic issues and, difficult flavors of stress. It's probably going to negatively impact your ability to achieve your goals, to have healthy, happy relationships, to manifest anything, to thrive. So look at mindset, the way you talk to yourself, the way you think about yourself, the way you think about others, the way you think about the world, what you believe is and isn't possible as one way that you can either impose stress on your neurobiology, therefore blocking your capacity to thrive, or if you shift your mindset to one that is more hopeful, looking for opportunities, reframes problems as challenges, is kind and compassionate to yourself and others, and holds this belief that, most people, the majority of people are just trying the best they can with the resources they've been given. Think about how that frees your neurobiology from a constant state of stress. So when we see others and ourselves as mostly good, and we're all human beings trying to figure this out, and there's no such thing as failure. There's only learned lessons. and that everybody is trying to do the best they can. And most of us want similar things like safety and happiness and loving relationships. And we want to be healthy and we want to make enough money that we can do the things we want to do. When we look at how we're more alike than how we're opposite, when we look at life as happening for us rather than to us, when we reframe the hard times as something is happening here and I want to pay attention so I get the lesson, you are essentially creating a resilient barrier for your nervous system from experiencing the same exact experience in one situation as something that you could learn from. And this is just what happens as a human being. And let me not be so hard on myself. Or you can go through that same exact experience and have more of a negative mindset. Think, oh, I'm terrible. I'm awful. I completely failed at this. Nothing is possible. I don't deserve good things. So you're, again, like the bird, like the animal in the water. It's the same exact experience, but your perspective is completely different. And however you are viewing that experience, the perspective that you are holding is either going to tax your neurobiology by creating a lot of stress for yourself, or it will be a barrier and a resilient kind of buffer against imposing stress on yourself and therefore creating a whole host of other problems. So perhaps rather than saying that all thoughts have energy, maybe we can think about all thoughts have a metabolic cost. And what kind of cost do I want to put on my nervous system based on the goals that I'm trying to achieve? Now, mindset can be really tricky because, as I mentioned earlier, some of your mindset is going to be conscious, some of it is unconscious. And a lot of your mindset does not come from you waking up one day and saying, you know what, I'm going to think this really difficult thing about myself. Mindset is often imposed on us by our society, by the people who raised us, by our relationships and people around us. So while our mindset and the paradigms we hold, we may not be responsible for, we are the only ones who can show up, get curious about what am I saying to myself and how do I take some control back and change that so I have more metabolic resources to do the things I want to do. And I'm not spending all these calories and taxing my nervous system on stress. And that does take time. That takes time. It's not like you can just say, I'm not going to think that way anymore. But the more you practice things, the more you change those thoughts, the more you will change your beliefs. Thoughts become beliefs. A repetitive thought or repetitive thoughts become beliefs. And so if you hold beliefs about yourself and others in the world, such as I'm not lovable, I'm not good, I'm not worthy, everybody's terrible, the world is on fire, those beliefs only came after so many repetitive thoughts in your life that led to those kind of being ingrained. So that also means because you have something called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity speaks to the power of our nervous system to transform and that we can build new neural networks. We can form new neural pathways that allow us to change our behaviors. So anytime that you try and develop a new habit or you try and change a behavior, you are relying on neuroplasticity to give you the capacity to build new neural networks so that eventually that attempted new habit just becomes a behavior and a way of living. So we can use the power of neuroplasticity when we try and change our paradigm and our mindset that we hold about the world and ourselves and others. Because if the repetition of thoughts leads to new beliefs, that means you have to start with starting to change your thoughts. And when you change your thoughts enough, those thoughts become new beliefs. And so if you're trying to thrive in your life, if you're trying to bring in more goodness and more wellness, then you have to start with changing the thought patterns that happen in your mind so that ultimately you change the beliefs that you hold about yourself and others in the world. Now, I know personally how hard this can be. I held a really kind of negative, distorted mindset for a good chunk of my adult life. Due to some really toxic, unhealthy relationships, I, for many years, carried the belief that I wasn't lovable and that I wasn't worthy, that I wasn't good enough and nobody would ever want me. Now, I recognize that those were not beliefs or thoughts that my parents impressed upon me, but those were beliefs that I soaked up from several really shitty toxic relationships, from a couple of guys who really did me wrong and one who was very abusive and hurtful, emotionally and physically. And I carried those beliefs with me for a long time. And when I was holding on to those beliefs as truth, my life was really rough because those thoughts, those beliefs were constantly putting my neurobiology into this taxed state of fight and flight. I was constantly anxious. My sleep really sucked. I was craving drugs and alcohol to try and regulate all the mess and distress I was feeling in my body. My relationships were really chaotic and constant points of drama. I didn't trust myself. I didn't really know myself. I wasn't very kind to myself. Life was hard. I was really depressed. I was really anxious. I was having very dark thoughts and thinking about ending my life. So I know how hard it is to be in those states and to have that mindset. It is debilitating and it is not your fault. And you are just having a human experience. But you have to make a promise to yourself and hold on to this awareness that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And if instead of looking at yourself and your life from the back of the auditorium, if you could shift your perspective and look at things from the front of that stage, what might look different? So the first thing to just ask yourself, if you are aware of some of those thought patterns that you get stuck in, that are causing you more harm, that are putting you into this constant state of surviving versus thriving, ask yourself, how do I know that to be true? How do I know that to be true? And then ask yourself, could there be another explanation? Could there be another explanation? The goal of these questions is to free yourself of the mental block that the way you've been thinking and what you've been perceiving is absolute finite truth. Because I just guarantee you that it is not. There are very few things that are absolute and finite. And our thought patterns are far from finite and absolute. They change based on what we engage in with the world, how we direct our mind, the guardrails we put up around our mind, the habits we engage in, the relationships that we're in. All of these things are forming your perspective, are forming whether you are seeing the world from the back of the auditorium or the front of the stage or in the second floor balcony. So if instead of just staying stuck in that perspective and taking it as truth, can you offer your brain and your neurobiology the opportunity to be curious and to be aware that maybe that's not true? Maybe if I looked at this from the front of the stage, I'd see something beautiful and amazing. Maybe if I looked at this from the second floor balcony, I would be humbled and inspired. So, my friend, get curious about what you're telling yourself. Get curious about the thoughts and beliefs that you're holding about yourself and others and the world that are costing you a lot of metabolic energy, that are putting you into constant states of stress, and therefore not serving your highest purpose or good. They're not allowing you to thrive. We'll have much more and many episodes to come on mindset, but for now, get curious and change the way you look at things, because when you do, the things you look at change. Ta-ta for now. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Thrive the Podcast. I hope these insights inspire positive changes in your life. If you're ready to take the next step in your Thrive journey, check out goodies linked in the show notes and on my website, RebeccaCase.com. Sign up for my newsletter and get access to helpful resources, connect with my community, and be the first to know about events and happenings. Remember, your journey from surviving to thriving is unique, and you have the power to create your best life. Subscribe, share, and thrive into your potential. Until next time, this is Rebecca Case, signing off. Thrive on.